The Braves chairman, the Braves GM keep telling us that there's money to spend, but if that's the case, why aren't they spending it? I'll answer that question and many more on today's Mailbag episode of Locked On Braves, so let's get into it.
You are Locked On Braves, your daily Atlanta Braves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, and welcome back to Locked On Braves, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, where we cover your favorite Atlanta sports teams each and every day. I'm your host, Jake Mastriani. You can follow me on social media at Shortstop the Ball. Follow the podcast on X at LockedOn_Braves and on Instagram at Locked On Braves. Subscribe to us on YouTube if you're new. Hit that thumbs up button. Leave me a comment down below. And if you're listening on the audio version, please leave me a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and let me know how much you enjoy listening to Locked On Braves each and every day. Thank you so much for your support here at Locked On Braves as we get through another week in spring training, inching closer and closer to the regular season again. Starting tomorrow, Saturday, it's the month of March, and we will be that much closer to the beginning of the 2025 season. Can't wait for it to get here, but a lot to unpack before we do, and it is our weekly Mailbag episode. We got 20 questions. We're back up to 20 questions now, so we got a lot to cover in today's podcast, a wide range of questions coming in, as always, that I will answer today. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. As I mentioned, we're back up over 20 questions. We're actually at 21 as I begin the podcast here, so a lot to get to, so I won't waste any more of your time. S. Denny 73 says, if the ABS had been used, how long do you think the Eric Gregg playoff game would have lasted? This is a hilarious question. I have not read some of these before pressing record here. Yeah, it's funny to think how it would have changed. Now, I don't know exactly how they're going to implement the rule. If you're only going to get so many challenges a game, if you win one, do you get an extra one? I think the way they did it in the minor league system was you got 3 challenges, and if you won one, you got a fourth, I think was how they did it. So that would limit some of it. But every time I see the highlights of that Eric Gregg game, it's just more and more unbelievable. And look, Levon got that zone. So did Greg Maddux in that game. But a lot of those pitches and the highlights you see happen to be against Braves hitters. I think it's the one with Fred McGriff where he just looks back at him like, you've got to be serious. That ball is halfway in the other batter's box. It's one of the worst umpiring performances I've ever seen. But hey, he stayed consistent. Isn't that what you all want? Isn't that what everybody says? Just be consistent. But I don't necessarily agree with that if you are consistently awful. But that is funny to think about. I've never really considered what that system would have looked like for that game. And I'm sure there are others that people can point to. Matt A. talks about how he can shop in any aisle. McGurk talks about how they have money to spend. I'm starting to feel McGurk tells him he can spend with a caveat if it ends up being a bad deal that he won't be able to spend in the future. Only true explanation why they don't. So this is kind of the title of the episode that I wanted to lead here with. I don't think that he's necessarily said there's a caveat that if you make a bad deal, you won't be able to spend again. I do think Alex Anthopoulos believes that. And this is Jake speaking. This is nothing that's been reported, nothing that has been said. It's just he's been the GM for quite a while now, and we have not seen him spend big in free agency. He's spent big on extensions for players, but we have not seen him spend big in free agency. And just my view of that from the outside is he is too afraid to get burnt by a bad deal. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, look at the Angels that have been trying to compete for years with the best player in baseball by taking on the Josh Hamiltons, the Anthony Rendones of the world that have ended up being bad contracts that have hurt them. Now, if money isn't an issue, take on all the bad contracts you want and just buy them out and continue to go spend money elsewhere. I do think there is some sort of cap. And again, this is Jake's thoughts, nothing that's been reported. Like Alex has said, he's never been denied anything. Like McGurk has said, he has money to spend. And the Braves have spent. There is a narrative out there that the Braves don't spend. They've been a top 5-6 payroll the past couple of years. It looks like they might be taking a step back this year, unfortunately. But the Braves have spent, and I think in the end will at least be a top 10 payroll this year. So the Braves do spend money. I do believe that there is some sort of cap And I do think for Alex Anthopoulos, he is worried about that bad contract that could keep him or prevent him from doing other moves in the future. I don't think McGurk has told him that. But again, that's all just speculation on my part. But I've said multiple times that I do think Alex Anthopoulos is sometimes a little too worried about that bad deal. I think he has the ability to spend what he wants to, but that doesn't mean he's just going to go out and give $700 million to Juan Soto. He's still going to spend wisely to do what's best for the long-term picture for this team so that this team is sustainable for years and years to come. And that's always been AA's mindset since coming over, is building a core and building it up to compete for years and years. And he's done a great job of that, I think. Another one from Matt: I'm going to be highly annoyed if Ian is the fifth starter if he gets blown up all spring training and someone like AJ Smith-Shawver ends up excelling just because of options. Throwing away games early on in the season when we have such a tough schedule could put us behind in the standings. This is a good point. Although I didn't get to watch it today, my MLB TV subscription just ended on me. I did not know that was going to happen, so I didn't get to watch the game this afternoon. But it sounds like Ian Anderson threw the ball a little bit better. So maybe this becomes a moot point if he does go on to have a good spring training. But I still agree with your overall argument that you're making here, is just because a pitcher, and it could be Grant Holmes too, just because they're out of options doesn't mean you have to hand them the job if there is a clear better pitcher. If AJ Smith-Shawver just looks like that guy and he looks clearly better than Grant Holmes and or Ian Anderson, then yes, you should be making the moves to help you win games and not just making moves based on who's out of options. I've made that argument for years now, that you field the best team. Alex Anthopoulos has not always agreed with that, and it's more about creating depth over 162. And I get that side of it as well, but you could do other things. You could put Ian Anderson in a bullpen role as a long reliever to begin the year if you didn't just want to give up on him. You could try to trade him and move him maybe for a bullpen piece. I don't think there'd be a lot of value, especially if he's getting lit up in spring training. Nobody's going to want to pay a high price for that. But I agree ultimately with what I think you're saying is you field the best roster no matter what, without really looking at options. But I will say, if there's not a definitive answer, let's say that all three of them look relatively good in spring training, then yeah, give the upper hand to the guy who is out of options and that you could potentially lose. And so while I do argue for that, I do also see the other side of it and wanting to have the most depth throughout the season. And I think for that to happen, the guy that you're pushing out, in this case, AJ Smith-Shawver, would have to look worlds better than Ian Anderson or Grant Holmes for me to give up that depth. So hopefully that makes sense. So I kind of agree with you, but I also see the other side of it. So don't really mean to straddle the fence on that one, but I do see both sides of the argument. Double A says, has there been anything you have seen thus far in spring that has surprised you, whether it's Braves related or something around the league? Be honest, I just haven't had a lot of time to watch what else is happening outside of the Braves, so I can't say anything else around the league, although Sandy Alcantara throwing 100 on Friday was pretty impressive, but that obviously involved the Braves. As far as the Braves itself, something that surprised me, I knew Nick, I don't want to become the Nick Allen apologist here, but I knew coming in he was known for his glove, but just in the few samples that I've seen, he really has, again, I want to say surprised me because I knew he had a good glove coming in. I never really watched him, but to see it and to see the smooth actions that he has, and honestly, the arm looked okay as well from shortstop. That's been, again, I don't want to use the word surprising necessarily, but it's been enjoyable to see, I guess. Eli White, the play that he made at second base in one of the first games, that was a bit surprising to me. But I don't know if there's anything else that I would say has been all that surprising to me in spring training. But let me know what you think. Has there been something that's really surprised you so far? I've seen some good things, some things I've liked for sure, but nothing that's really caught me off guard that maybe I didn't see coming. so far in spring training. Goldie, who do you feel is the biggest threat to the Braves in the NL East now that we are closing in on the season? The Mets are getting a lot of love, but their rotation scares no one. It feels like people are sleeping on the Phillies a little bit. What are your thoughts? We're kind of in a weird spot with the NL East. I feel like I think there are people that are sleeping on the Phillies. I think there are people that are sleeping on the Braves. I feel like there are people that are sleeping on the Mets. The Mets get the most attention because they are a New York team. I think they're pretty, I hope I don't eat these words. I think they're pretty clearly a step below the Braves and the Phillies, mainly because of that rotation. They're already going into the year a little banged up in that rotation. I think the offensive lineup is very top heavy. They do have some power potential at the bottom of the order in a Vientos, in a Francisco Alvarez, Nimmo, McNeil are some good bats down in the order, but I do think it's very top heavy. So I put them, I still think they could be a playoff team. I'm not saying they're going to be bad, but I think the Braves and Phillies are a step above them. And I think those are the two teams. I do agree with you. I think there has been very little talk about the Phillies this offseason, and Jordan Romano looked pretty good in his outing the other day. I did hear that. So that can be a really big plus for them. But yeah, I feel like maybe it's just because all these teams are so good that I don't think any one is really being pushed up. And so it feels like everybody's kind of sleeping on each of them individually. There hasn't been that, unless you just want to say the Mets, because like I said, they signed Soto, they had the big off season signing and all of that. There's been a lot of talk about the Mets, but I don't feel like I have in other years where there's one team that's just being pushed to the top of the NL East. I think it's going to be a 3-team race. I think it's going to be a battle. And I think a lot of people kind of just view it that way, that all three could be playoff teams, and just whoever happens to win the division, is likely going to get one of those buys and be a top 2 seed. I think this division is that good. All right, we got a lot more questions to get to on today's podcast. We'll pick those things up here next. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to bet a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action, and if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com to join today for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. You want to take a look at FanDuel.com right now. Look at some MLB odds. They have home run odds out there. Who's going to lead the league in home runs, World Series odds, stolen base odds, division winners odds, awards odds. You can see all that over there on FanDuel.com. Cy Young Award odds are out there as well. Chris Sale, your reigning NL Cy Young winner, is at plus 1,700. Here's something interesting. I don't think he was here the last time I looked. They have Sandy Alcantara now at plus 1,500, moving ahead of Chris Sale. So a lot of hype coming out of spring training for Sandy Alcantara. I don't know that he's going to throw the innings to get that, but certainly has looked pretty good early on. But again, you can check all that out over at FanDuel.com. Also, make sure you're at FanDuel.com/play-safe for tools and resources to help you stay in control of the way that you play. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thanks as always for making Locked On Braves your first listen of the day. Go check out Locked On MLB for your second listen, solely getting you caught up with everything happening around Major League Baseball. And this will be the last podcast of the week here, unless something crazy happens over the weekend. Otherwise, we'll be back on Monday for another 5-episode week. So make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Braves. Let's jump back into the questions, though, because we got plenty more to get to. Braves and Bama says, if the Blue Jays aren't competitive and they have a fire sale at the deadline, do you see Bo being a possibility even as a rental? The way I kind of look at this question is, would the Braves pay for Bo Bichette and the cost that it would take for just a rental if they knew they were going to trade for him and it only be for 2.5 months of the season? Obviously, it's hard to tell depending on price, but assuming he is an attractive option at the trade deadline, that probably means he's having a bounce back season and looks more like the Bo Bichette that we saw for 4 or 5 years before what happened last year, where he dealt with injury all season long, just had a terrible year. It's obviously going to depend on the price, but if that is the case, the price is probably going to be pretty high. I don't think they would have any problems trading for him as a rental, assuming it doesn't cost you one of your top 5 prospects. Like there are certain, I wouldn't give up any of the guys that I really like, which means you're probably not going to get them. But I wouldn't give up AJ Smith-Shawver. I wouldn't give up Drake Baldwin, Hurston Waldrop, J.R. Ritchie, Jose Perdomo, Luis Guanipa. I wouldn't give up anybody like that. Obviously, Torrens, the guy that international prospect they just signed. I wouldn't give up any of those guys for him, but an Owen Murphy, a Drew Hackenberg, somebody like that, and kind of the next tier of prospects, I'd be okay with it, even as a rental type of player. I don't think the Braves. I don't think that if you're asking me to predict, would that happen? I don't think they would, because I think, again, if he is an attractive rental at the deadline, that means he's having a good first half, which means his price is going to be maybe even higher than it is now. So, and I think that's part of the Blue Jays hanging on to him, is hoping that he is healthy, he gets back to the Bo Bichette he was before, and that the price at the deadline, when teams are more desperate, could be even higher, and they could get a greater return there. Either that, or they really think they're going to compete in the AL East, which I just don't buy. So again, the rental thing, I don't think that would hold them back. I think the price probably would. Jason Hensley, what is your current guess as to why the Braves payroll is roughly $20 million lower than last year when AA said payroll will go up? Do you think AA could possibly just feel really good about the team and held on to the money for the trade deadline to fill holes? There's a lot to unpack in this question here, and a lot that I want to say, but I want to get to all the other questions as well. First of all, we have learned this offseason you can't always take what AA says at face value. He said they were going to bring the coaching staff back. They had a meeting, talked about it, decided not to bring all the coaching staff back. So you can't always take what the GM says as gospel. The luxury tax the final luxury tax number doesn't come into play until the end of the year. So where the Braves are now, that doesn't mean that's where they'll be when the season ends. We know that Alex likes to have some payroll flexibility for in-season moves. There are also some free agents still out there now that they could go get, like a David Peterson, a Jose Quintana, a Kyle Gibson. And Terry McGurk talked about this as well in the article by Evan Drellich on The Athletic, saying that there's money to spend and they can still go do something like they did last year in signing Adam Duvall for $3 million late in spring training. So I think, and again, this is just Jake speaking, and that's why you're listening. You want to hear my opinion on this, I assume. I think part of it is, yes, he does like this team. I think part of it is he wants to see what he has in Ronald Acuna Jr. and Spencer Strider coming back from injury and what they're going to look like. Because if those two come back and they are who they have been, this team is golden. If Spencer Strider comes back and looks like a Cy Young contender, if Ronald Acuna Jr. comes back and looks like an MVP candidate, this team is going to be really good. Now, I don't think that should stop you from going out and getting a Quintana for depth, as I've said for a while now. I also think that they're going to try to stay under the luxury tax, because here's the thing. If you're just going to go over the tax by a little, I don't know that it's worth it. I think if they went over the tax, the 241 luxury tax, they go over by $5 million. That's not a big tax that you're going to have to pay on that, because you're only paying on the overages. Even with the third year tax, that's not going to be a lot of money, but it is going to be a third straight year that you've paid the tax and that you didn't get a chance to reset it. And so now next year you want to go into the tax again and you want to spend big. Okay, well, now you're still paying that high elevated tax because you've gone over the tax for 3 straight years. So, and I made this argument, did a whole podcast on it early in the offseason. If they are going to stay under the tax this year, it better mean that they're going to spend big in future seasons. And so as much as I don't think they should be held back by that, if that is their thinking, please don't go over the tax by $5 million. I would rather them at that point just stay under, reset it, if the mindset is to spend big next year. So I think there's a lot of factors going into it. There's a lot of players coming back from injury. I think Alex Anthopoulos wants to see what these guys look like coming back from injury, what he has with Ronald, what he has with Strider, what do they look like coming back before he can fully assess what this team can be. and to leave himself for some flexibility for in season. Well, look, this team is good, and I think he believes that. But I also, I want him to go out and get some depth, even if it is signing a Quintana or a David Peterson or something like that. But is that the move they're going to make to put them over the tax? Because you don't go make a move like that, even if you sign one of those guys for 6, 7, 8 million, which I think is probably as low as one of those veterans would go to entice them to come back for another year. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe you can get them for 5 million or less. If that's the case, that deal should have been done already. But they're 11 million from the tax already. You go and sign a Jose Quintana for 7, 8 million. That doesn't leave you a lot of wiggle room for the regular season if you're wanting to stay under the tax. And again, I know they've said that they're okay going over the tax, but are they willing to go over the tax for Jose Quintana? Yeah, I think it's a question. And I think the answer to that is definitely no. Joshua Julian, thoughts on Drew Hackenberg getting some starts later this year? All things being equal, I would guess that it's either him or AJ Smith-Shawver next up if Ian or Grant get hurt or struggle. I don't know that I put Hackenberg up that far, at least to start. Your question was later in the year. I do think there's a chance later in the year that he, Lucas Braun, and even Blake Burkhalter could get an opportunity. I like those guys. I do. I hope it doesn't happen because that means that there's trouble in the rotation. That means there's injuries. But I think Drew Hackenberg is certainly, knocking on the door to get an opportunity at some point this year. But I don't know that I'd put him, at least right now, next in line after AJ Smith-Shawver. I think Bryce Elder would get a chance, maybe even Hurston Waldrop, and maybe even some of those non-roster guys like a Davis Daniel might get an opportunity before a Drew Hackenberg does. I think if he gets a chance, I think it's later in the year. Justin Shoemake, if Kelenic proves in spring and early in season while Acuna is out that he can be a good everyday player, do the Braves package him with some prospects to get another bullpen piece or maybe upgrade at shortstop, or do they just hang on to him for outfield depth? I don't know that Jared Kelenic, even, let's say he gets off, let's say he has a good spring training, which how much stock do you really put into that? But then let's say he gets off to a good start in the season while Acuna's out. Is that enough time for him to recoup the value to really get you something significant in a trade? I don't think so. Maybe you can get a bullpen piece for him, a team that's, needs help in the outfield, looking for a young, controllable outfielder, and they're willing to give up a setup man that has maybe a year or two of control. That might be a possible move that could happen. But just the way you phrased your question, I don't think he would get the value to really get you anything significant in a trade based on spring training and 1 month of the regular season of him being good. It's enough of a track record now of him being bad. I don't think a team is all of a sudden going to say, oh, he had a good spring training. Oh, he had a first good 3 to 4 weeks of the season. We believe in him. Let's give up something that we value for Jared Kelenic to be our future outfielder. I don't see that happening. Certainly not for any type of upgrade at shortstop. Like I said, maybe for a bullpen piece, but more likely, I think the Braves just hold on to him for outfield depth. All right, we got a lot more questions to get to on the episode. Oh, that's a lot of questions left, but we'll take one more break and then we'll jump back into the questions and wrap things up. Thank you as always for submitting all these great questions. I really do appreciate it. I'm going to try to go through the rest of these now. If I don't get to them, I'll come back to them on next week's podcast. Benjamin Dalton says, is there a possibility Eli White can take over at shortstop? Would love to see him given a shot. Could use that speed on base, batting in the ninth hole in the front of Profar. No. I need to see more, and I don't think you can see that in a spring training. And I think he's going to be on the roster, which means he's not going to get a lot of live reps at shortstop for me to ever think that he could take over for Orlando Arcia, who at the very least is going to give you solid defense there. And I don't know that Eli White can give you much more offensively. I think Eli White's best role is as a super utility guy and pinch runner off the bench. Ransom, if you had to build your own all-star rotation with Braves players from the past and present, whom would you choose and why? So these are the questions that get me in trouble because you're wanting me to think of people off the top of my head. So I'm going to go with what Braves and Bama said to your reply. Smoltz, Maddox, Glavine. Those are the three that have to be in the rotation. 2024 version of Chris Sale. And Chris, I would take Strider in this. I know there's going to be some older people that are going to say, why didn't I take Nuxie in this or somebody else like that? But those were the names that came to mind for me too. And if you don't like it, take it out on Braves Bama because that was his response. But I do think those are those are some of the names that when I initially read this question, those were some of the names that came to mind. I think it has to start with the big three, and then the other two, I think, can be a little bit more subjective. Tim Barnes, why will Grant Holmes be successful in year 2 and not fall prey to the lose the job level of regression that we have seen recently with Elder and Anderson? If he is successful in year 2, and if he is successful in making the transition to a starter full time, because I think that's what the question is here. How does he not fall to that regression that we've seen with Elder and Anderson? I think it's because the slider is just really, really good. And I think it's because he's able to throw strikes, keep hitters off, off balance a little bit, be a good pitcher. But I think the slider has to be a dominating pitch like it was for him last year. In order for him to stick in the rotation and not have a lot of regression, that slider has to be a dominant pitch for him like it was last year when it had a 41.5% whiff rate. I didn't realize the curveball was as good as it was last year either. He threw it 21.5% of the time. It also had a whiff rate over 40% and a expected batting average of 196 against. So, I mean, that's 2 pitches with an over 40% whiff rate, along with a fastball that averaged 94.6. Now, those stats are combining him as both a starter and a reliever. So I think the key is, can he do that 2-3 times through an order? Can he consistently go 5 or 6 innings in a game? Same questions we had for Ronaldo Lopez last year. And look, Lopez wasn't always going 6 or 7 innings, but even if Grant Holmes as your 4th or 5th starter is giving you 4 or 5 really good innings and is able to get through a lineup pretty easily 2 times, much like Ronaldo Lopez did last year, I'm fine with that. So I think the key for Grant Holmes is, can those secondaries, mainly I was focused on the slider, but I didn't realize how good the curveball was as well. Can he continue to have those big whiff rates as a starter, a 2nd and 3rd time through the order? Can he hold up to that? That would be the key thing for me with Grant Holmes, and why he would be able to have that level of success in year 2 and not fade back. If hitters start to adjust to him and they start to recognize that slider, that curveball the 2nd and 3rd time through, then that's when I would start to worry a little bit. Donald Langley, are you ready to give Schwelly that AA extension, or do you need him to do it again this year? I'm ready to give it to him. I believe in Schwellenbach. Just the mound presence and the mentality that he had, it is Spencer Strider-esque. And you can just see that from him, a young kid coming up, learning how to pitch on the fly at the big league level, and being able to take all of that and thrive when his team needed him. That's all I needed to see. Now, injuries are a part of it, and injuries are certainly something that can happen with any pitcher, and it's why an extension of any kind is risky. Look at Spencer Strider and what's happened there. But have I seen enough for me to think he's going to be a good big league pitcher for a while? Yes. And I know you probably could have said that for a Michael Soroka and Ian Anderson, although I had questions about Ian Anderson even when he was succeeding. The Soroka stuff is just too Achilles. I mean, nobody would have seen that coming. Kyle Wright with the shoulder issues, that's one that would have worried me from doing an extension, and it took him a while to get on board. But Schwellenbach, just with his mound presence, the way he handled everything last year and continued to thrive and get better, yeah, I've seen enough. If you wanted to give that extension now, I'd be okay with it. Kane Suttles, why does Arcia get more of a pass at being horrible last year than Kelenic does? I felt like Kelenic was more reliable, yet he loses his job and looks like Arcia will keep his. Because who are you replacing Arcia with is the question. I mean, last year, Kelenic lost his job because Ramon Laureano was outperforming him. There was nobody pushing Orlando Arcia, and there still is nobody pushing Orlando Arcia, unless Nick Allen actually does, which I don't think is going to happen. But that's why, he's Arcia is getting more of a pass than Kelenic did, is because Kelenic had somebody pushing him, taking his playing time. Arcia doesn't have anybody like that. G2X says, what does MH2 need to do to have a breakout season? Seems like each year he has bright spots, but it's never completely all there. I pray 2025 is his year. Stay healthy. I mean, it's really as simple as that. The past 2 years, 3 years ago, his rookie season, he just was late coming up. And so he was great from then on. The last 2 years, he's been hurt at the beginning of the season, gotten off to slow starts, and then had great second halves. So being healthy from the jump and all throughout, if he does that, Michael Harris is going to have 25 homer, 25 steal, 280, 290 batting average type of year, along with Gold Glove defense. So I hate to make it that simple, but I mean, there are some other things he needs to do, better plate discipline, and being able to take some more pitches, take some more walks, getting more of that opposite field power that we really see him get into when he's going, but mostly just stay healthy. Carter Smith, Jake, at what point do we recognize Sean Murphy is not the answer at catcher? We have one of the best catching prospects in the league who seems to be MLB ready, but seems to be log jammed by the criminal wearing number 12 on the back of his jersey. I hope I am proven wrong. Hope you are too, because I like Sean Murphy. I've already taken him in a couple of best ball fantasy baseball drafts this year. But at what point do we recognize Sean Murphy is not the answer? I mean, if he continues to get hurt, I think is one thing. And if he continues to be just a well below average hitter, then I think that's probably the point. If you can't trust him to be out there for 120, 130 games a year at catcher, maybe 130 is a little too much, but at least 120 games a year at catcher, and you can't rely on him to hit above 200 and give you 15 to 20 home run power, which is kind of why you got him. I think obviously if he fell apart defensively, that would be a huge red flag. I just don't see that happening, but it would more so have to be just the offense. Kind of same thing with Orlando Arcia. Like, at what point does the defense really outweigh how bad he is offensively? It's the same question we have with Orlando Arcia. At what point do you finally say, okay, the good defense that Sean Murphy is giving us is not outweighing just the automatic out he is in the lineup? I think that's the point that they are with Orlando Arcia. I think it would probably take another year of that for Sean Murphy to finally say, okay, the great defense is not outweighing the bad offensively, especially when we already have somebody ready who we think could do that. And like I said a minute ago with Arcia, the Braves don't have anybody ready to push him, but they do have somebody at catcher that could push Sean Murphy. But I think it would probably take another year like we had last year with Sean Murphy, where one, he's either banged up a lot, and two, when he is healthy, the offense is not good enough to make up for what he's giving you defensively. I may have said that backwards, but hopefully you understood. Isaac Bowman, how do you think age plays into Braves not paying for shortstop position? Seems like historically they don't invest there much. Where do they invest much in free agency? I don't know that age has a ton to do with it, but certainly Alex Anthopoulos is just about every move he's made. He is, except for Ozuna, I think maybe Profar, as well as going to his age 30, 32 season. He's not really targeting guys that are in their 30s, especially if he's looking for somebody for the long-term future of this team. He's going to want to target players that are in there, at least in their mid 20s. So, but I don't know that prevents them from going out and making a move at shortstop just strictly based on age. I think that would be preferred. But I guess the question becomes are you okay really pursuing and trading? Would you rather pursue and trade a shortstop that's in their mid to late 20s, or sign a free agent shortstop that's going into their 30s? And if you were to ask me which one of those do I think is most likely, I think you would rather trade for a shortstop that is going into their mid to late 20s rather than sign an aging shortstop. Bill Tyler, if Ian Anderson doesn't make the opening day roster, do you think he gets traded instead of DFA? Do you think there is a package they can put together for a shortstop prospect? Not for any relevant shortstop prospect. I think they would try to trade him. They might put him in the bullpen first, and while they explore a trade for a team that's maybe looking for a back of the rotation starter, I think they would try to do. I think they'd either try to put him in the bullpen and/or try to trade him before they DFA him, because I think there's some team that would be willing to take a chance on Ian Anderson, and even if you get something for him, maybe it's not a top shortstop prospect, but maybe a lottery ticket type of prospect, I think you could still get for an Ian Anderson. Albuquerque Braves fan, what's the benefit of optioning younger guys like Hurst and Waldrop so early in spring camp? Well, because those guys you want to get stretched out and you want them to get work, and they're just not going to get it in big league camp. So you send them down to minor league camp where they can, get more work and they can get stretched out and ready for the season. There's just not the innings for them at big league camp right now, as starters are going to continue to ramp up their workload. There's going to be less innings to give to guys like a Hurst and Waldrop. And then last one here from Jeremy Vincent. Which series this year are you most excited about? And which stretch would you see the Braves rattle off an 8+ game winning streak? So I have not looked that deeply into the Braves schedule. I will tell you the game that I'm most excited about is the first game, because I cannot wait for the season to get started. I know that's kind of a bailout of an answer there, but I am very much looking forward to that series, because you got the Padres and you got the Dodgers right out of the gate on the road. So that's going to be a really fun way to start the season for the Atlanta Braves. Just quickly looking through the schedule and where I see, the potential to rack up some wins. May 9th through May 15th, they play 7 games against the Pirates and the Nationals, as long as the Nationals don't really do them like they did last year. Then they have 3 against the Red Sox and then 3 more against the Nationals. So the middle of May might be an opportunity for the Braves to rack up some wins. There's the early part, or in a good part of their schedule. Outside of that, I mean, it just kind of scrolling through the schedule here. It's good team, bad team, good team, bad team. There's really not a lot. Right before the All-Star break, you got 3 against the A's and 3 against the Cardinals, who I don't think are going to be that good this year. That might be another soft stretch for them. The schedule is also pretty front-loaded. So it should get easier as the season goes on, but you look at it, you've got 3 against the Guardians and then 3 against the White Sox, but then 3 against the Mets and then 3 against the Marlins and then 4 against the Phillies. So it's a lot of good, bad on the schedule this year. Now you do in the season, you got 3 against the Nationals, 3 against the Tigers. I know they were good last year. I need them to prove it to me again. But then you got 3 more against the Nationals, and you end with 3 against the Pirates. So the last couple of weeks of the regular season do seem to be a pretty favorable stretch. So middle of May and then the end of the year, I'd say are probably the best bets for the Braves to rattle off a bunch of wins. All right. Thank you so much for the questions. Sorry for those who were here live. Wasn't able to get to some of your comments, but I appreciate you joining me in here. Doug Belly in here, Mass Boost, Jeffrey Humphreys, as always. Thank you so much for joining. Chris Hester, BC, as always, with your Dodgers slander in here. Little E as well. Thank you for joining. Christopher Stringer, appreciate you so much. Thank you all for your support here at Locked On Braves. Make sure you are subscribed on YouTube. Hit that thumbs up button if you haven't already. Leave me a comment down below. Hope you all have a great weekend watching some Braves spring training action and some college baseball that I'm looking forward to watching this weekend. Make sure you rate, review, and subscribe to the Locked On Braves podcast wherever you get your podcast, and we will talk to you next time.